Ritchey Chretien telescopes need to be collimated, but they've got this bad reputation for being difficult to collimate. But if you're patient and you understand the steps and have the right tools, I'm here to show you that collimating a Ritchey Chretien telescope is actually quite simple to do. So, before I get into everything, I need to go over some of the tools you're going to need to collimate your Ritchey Chretien telescope the right way the first time. The first tool that you're going to need in order to collimate your Ritchey Chretien telescope is included in the box with the purchase, and it's one of these 25mm extension rings. As you can see, it's fairly wide, but it's 25mm deep, and this is going to give us the correct distancing for the focuser when we're doing our collimation. The next tool that you're going to need is a separate purchase, but it's one of these collimation rings for the focuser. Now, this one is from GSO, which is the maker of the telescope over here. And it has a couple of screws that are push and pull. The grub screws push against the ring, and the middle screw here pulls the ring apart, and that gives you the ability to tip and tilt this ring in 3 different positions to get the focuser collimated. Other tools that you're going to need are Allen wrenches. You're going to need some metric size Allen wrenches, and you're going to need some wrong sized Allen wrenches. The wrong size Allen wrenches are for the secondary mirror in the front. The metric size Allen wrenches are going to be used for the primary mirror collimation and the focuser collimation. Additionally, a very useful tool for collimating to get it as precise as you can without doing a star test is this Howie Glatter laser collimator. This is a high precision laser collimator for reflector type telescopes such as Schmidt-Cassegrains, Newtonians, and Ritchey Chrétiens. In this bag, I have the 2 different laser attachments that you need for that Howie Glatter. The included one is a fine focus laser beam attachment. The other one is holographic rings, and we will need those for collimating the primary mirror. The final tool that you're going to need to collimate your Ritchey Chretien telescope are one of these Cheshire eyepieces. They've got a tiny little hole here that you look through, and on the part that goes into the telescope, there's this reflective surface that's going to help bounce light coming into the telescope off of this to make it shine so you can see what's going on. This is useful for centering your secondary mirror and primary mirror with each other. This is how we get a very close but rough collimation in the beginning. After that, we're going to use the laser to fine-tune all of these surfaces to make sure that it is collimated. If you've been planning on purchasing a Ritchey Chretien telescope, but you aren't quite sure what you need to purchase in terms of tools, don't worry, I have links to everything down in the description. By making a purchase through one of the links below, you will be helping to support this channel, as I will receive a small affiliate commission on anything that you buy. So to get started, the very first thing that we want to do is put together all of the parts on the rear of the telescope. That would be the 25mm extension ring, our tilt plate, the focuser, and then we're going to put the Cheshire eyepiece in the back of the focuser. You just take your 25mm ring and your tilt plate and thread them together. Once you have the 2 threaded together, you thread this surface on the back of the telescope. After you have your tilt plate and extension tube on the back of the telescope, let's put the focuser on next. Our final step is to insert the Cheshire into the back of the focuser. And when we tighten these down, we don't want to tighten them down very tight. We just want it snug enough that you could grab it and with a little bit of effort, pull it out. It doesn't need to fall out if you tilt it, and if you tighten it too much, there's a chance it itself could tilt and throw your collimation line of sight off. All right, with that installed, we're going to go to the front of the telescope and we're going to do one last thing. There are several tutorials and videos out there that actually instruct you to take the rear cell of your telescope off and remove the baffle tube. Don't do this. Instead, just reach in the front and unscrew the front half of that baffle tube. It comes right off, and it gives us the clearance necessary to see the secondary mirror's little donut reflect off the primary mirror. There's no need to remove the entire baffle tube to do this. If you do take your telescope apart, at some point you're gonna have to put it back together. And that process may throw the collimation that you painstakingly worked on off. Once it's off, lay it on the bottom and just slide it out in this orientation, and it can clear your secondary mirror and the spider veins. Just set it off to the side for now. We won't be needing it until we're done collimating. We're gonna take a look through here, but we need a bright surface to reflect light off of. So I've got a lamp pointed at a white door to use as a reflection surface. And what we want to do is first make sure that the primary mirror can create a nearly perfect ring around the outermost black area and the innermost set of concentric rings. It'll be the first line of light that you will see, and if you can get that, for the most part, even in thickness, you'll know that the primary mirror is nearly collimated. It's not going to be perfect, and we're going to use lasers to refine it later. The reason why we want to get the primary mirror closely collimated in the beginning as an initial step is any changes to that primary mirror's collimation is going to affect our focuser's collimation. If we can get this near enough in the beginning, it's going to make collimating the focuser and the secondary easier at the beginning. So you can see that I've got light going on over here on the door, and that's making a very bright reflection off that door, so I can peer through here and I can definitely see how misaligned everything is. So I just took a photo of it, which you can see here, and you can see that there's the outermost ring of illumination is definitely off center. That's our primary mirror, and that primary mirror needs to be coaxial with the optical tube. Now we're going to change that later, but we want to get it kind of close now because that'll make it easy to get the focuser collimated with the OTA and that secondary mirror. The secondary mirror is actually the first mirror that we're going to collimate precisely. Once that's collimated as perfectly as we can get it, then we're going to refine primary mirror and focuser. We want to use that secondary mirror as our reference surface. How that's going to work is we're going to use the Howie Glatter laser to bounce the laser off the secondary right back onto the emitter of the laser. And if we can do that, we know that the Howie Glatter laser and the secondary are perfectly parallel with one another. And if we can do that, then we know that the secondary mirror surface is exactly where we need it to be, and that becomes our reference point. All other collimation that we do is going to be based off of a perfectly perpendicular or parallel, however you want to think about it, secondary mirror. A trick for collimating your primary mirror is to first roll your focuser all the way out. When you look through it, that outermost ring is going to be at its thinnest. And as you slowly rack it back in, you'll start to see it thicken up on one side. As soon as you see that, stop moving the focuser and begin adjusting your primary mirror to try to get that slightly thick line uniform all the way around. To begin adjusting that primary mirror, you need 2 Allen keys. The first one is a 2.5 millimeter Allen key, and you use that to loosen all of the grub screws that lock the mirror in place. You really only need to loosen these about a half turn. The other Allen key you'll need is the 3 millimeter Allen key. And this is the key that actually does the adjustment of that primary mirror. Again, we're loosening the grub screws about a half turn, so we should not need to make any more than a half turn on any of those 3 screws to adjust the primary mirror. If you need further adjustment, go ahead and back the grub screws out just a little bit more as needed. As I saw through the Cheshire, I have a thicker part on this right side and almost no illumination on that outermost ring on the left side. So I'm going to start by adjusting the mirror screw on this side. And I'm just going to make tiny little turns in or out to see which direction it moves. And once I see that it's moving in the right direction, I'm going to commit to that by tightening that one side and then loosening the other two screws. This will be a little bit of a balancing act to figure out how much you tighten on one side and loosen on the other to get that ring about as uniform as we can get. As you can see from this photo, I have a nearly uniform outer ring, which indicates my primary mirror is parallel with the optical tube body. And this doesn't mean that it's collimated, but what it does is it gets me a parallel starting point to then use with the focuser when I get the focuser to bounce its beam to the secondary mirror. I know that it should be more or less going straight down the tube if the mirror and the focuser were in alignment. Once I have the focuser adjusted to bounce that laser light off the center of that secondary mirror, and I can get that secondary mirror adjusted to bounce its laser back onto the focuser's emitter, then I know that any adjustments that I have to do to the primary will be minor, and the focuser follow-up adjustments will also be minor. While we have the Cheshire in place, let's address that secondary mirror donut. As you can see, it's set off to the side a little bit, and we need to get that back in place. So to do so, we're just going to peer through here, and we're going to make adjustments to that secondary to try and nudge it back into the middle. Once again, this is a rough collimation, but it's going to be fairly accurate. In fact, there's a lot of people who can collimate a Ritchey Chretien using only a Cheshire eyepiece. This will get us close. We're going to use lasers later to refine it and get it perfect. To make those adjustments on the secondary mirror, we need a 5/32 Allen key. Now, I know that my dot is off to the side on the right, so I need to nudge it back this way. So I'm going to use the two screws on the front that correspond with it being off this side, and I'm going to try and tighten them to see, do they nudge back this way? This is a lot easier when you have help. And as you can see from this photo, after making those adjustments, I have the donut on the secondary mirror fairly well centered. Now it's time to switch over to the Howie Glatter laser collimator. With your Howie Glatter laser collimator, the first attachment you're going to want is the fine focus laser. And we're going to insert that into our focuser, but first make sure you have tightened down the grub screws on the primary mirror. This is a heavy piece of equipment, and when you put it in your focuser and those screws are not tightened down, you're going to affect the primary mirror's tilt, which will, because it's connected, impact the tilt of your focuser, and it's going to make all of that work we did with the primary mirror ineffective. So once you have those tightened down with the 2.5 millimeter Allen key, you're going to put your Howie Glatter laser collimator into the focuser, tighten it down just so it's snug. You should be able to twist it around, but not really pull it out. If you tighten it too much, it could cause that laser to deflect, and that's going to impact your ability to collimate the focuser and the secondary mirror. Everything we're doing at this point is to get the secondary mirror perfect, and we start by getting the focuser collimated and bouncing its laser off of the center donut of that secondary mirror. You'll want to loosen the push screws of your focusing ring using the 2 millimeter Allen key. And then you can make your adjustments using the same 3 millimeter Allen key that you used for the primary mirror. In order to see what we're doing, I've spun the telescope around so I can look down the tube and see where the laser beam is in relation to the secondary mirror's donut. As you look down there, you'll notice that there will be a bright part of that laser that is just offset of center. Do not be tempted to adjust your secondary mirror to meet that laser. Instead, adjust the focuser to get the laser in the middle of that donut. So I'm gonna, again, trial and error, tighten or loosen just a little bit to see which direction that laser moves. In this case, I'm going to be tightening. And it drifted from top right to dead top. So I'm gonna go to the bottom screw and adjust it loose or tight to see if I can get that laser to drop into the donut. Tightening that makes it drift up, so we're gonna loosen to make it drift down. And that looks about perfect. You'll notice as you're doing these, it doesn't take much of a turn to get the laser to move a lot. To center that laser from the initial photo that you saw, I've only moved those screws about a quarter turn, sometimes even less. But as you can see here in the video, that laser is now fairly centered in the middle of that donut. So the next step here is to get that secondary mirror collimated with the focuser. We want that beam to bounce back onto the emitter. As you can see from this video, we're looking at the emitter right now. Down about here is the secondary mirror center spot. Up here is the emitter. And you'll see that there's a bright beam at the top. That's actually a reflection from the secondary mirror that we can actually ignore. So if we blink, we can kind of shut that off. And what we're looking for is the intensity of that really bright dot from the emitter to change, but only on top of itself. And it looks like it's changing just slightly to the top. So we'll need to bring the secondary mirror down a hair. So now when I blink, you can see the emitter changes intensity in the same spot. What that means is we can emit a beam from the focuser to the center of that secondary mirror, and the center of that secondary mirror will bounce that beam directly back onto the emitter. They are on the same optical axis now. However, we do need to adjust the primary mirror to get it perfect. And in doing so, we're going to ruin the collimation of the focuser, which is why it's essential to get this correct now. The more time you spend perfecting your secondary mirror, the easier it will be to reset your focuser back to center and have collimation throughout. So at this point, we're gonna change the adapter on the front of that Howie Glatter from the fine focus to holographic rings. What I'm doing now is I'm tightening down the locking screws on that focuser collimation ring. I'm not making them super tight, just snugging them up. And the reason I want to do that is as I adjust the tilt of the primary mirror, I'm going to change the tilt of the focuser, and if it moves, it could shift the collimation. With the holographic ring projector installed on the Howie Glatter, you can point it at a white surface, like this cardstock I've got taped to a door, and project the rings onto it. And what we're going to be looking for are broken rings in the middle. They're probably not showing up very well in the video, so I'm going to shut my light off so they show up better. And as you can see, right in here, this is a little broken, but I've got a really thick line here. So we're going to go back to our primary mirror, loosen the grub screws. We're going to make adjustments to try and make this inner ring uniform. In doing so, we're going to break the collimation on the focuser, but that's not a huge deal. If we make small adjustments to the primary mirror, we only need to make small adjustments to the focuser. So, with that said, don't try to get this perfect in one shot. Do incremental, tiny adjustments. Using the 3mm Allen key, I've gone ahead and put it into the upper right hand adjustment screw for the primary mirror. And that's because the laser ring is thinnest in the upper right hand corner. So I'm going to make a tiny change to loosen it and see if it balances out. And it looks like it did, and that was literally just a 20th of a turn. It is the tiniest amount that you need to adjust. It looks like the collimation might be a little thin on the bottom as a result. So I'm going to, again, just loosen or tighten that ever so slightly to see what happens. If I tighten, it thins up. If I loosen, it balances out. In fact, that looks fairly balanced all around right there. So we're going to lock those back in place. And when I say lock those, I mean the primary mirror bolts. Be very careful when you snug these in. If you tighten these too much, it will shift the mirror and it'll throw the collimation off. With it tightened, I'm going to rack the focuser from all the way out to all the way in and see if that line begins to break somewhere before it breaks anywhere else. And as we can see, it seems to be breaking in the middle, but the two outer edges diagonal are correct. That could be a symptom of the secondary mirror having a little bit of miscollimation or the focuser now being slightly miscollimated. We're going to switch back to the fine laser on the Howie Glatter, and we're going to adjust our focuser and see if we can get it centered on the secondary mirror again and correct these misshapen rings. With our primary mirror tightened back down so it doesn't shift while adjusting the focuser, I've switched to the fine laser pointer adapter on the Howie Glatter. I've put it back into the focuser tube. We're going to spin this around and we're going to realign our focuser to the secondary mirror. The laser is on the top part of the secondary mirror's donut, so we need to adjust the focuser to drop that laser back down. Now, because my laser is on the top end of that donut, I want to adjust the bottom bolt and see if I can get that laser to drift down into the center of the donut. The laser is on the bottom left-hand side of the donut, so I'm going to adjust the top right-hand bolt to see if I can get it centered up even better. Here you can see the laser is in the center of the donut, which is exactly where we want it to be. Just for sanity's sake, we're going to double check the secondary mirror to make sure it's still bouncing a beam back to that emitter. So here's the emitter, and if we blink the donut off, it looks like the emitter is changing intensity right on top of itself. So at this stage in the collimation process, it's just an iteration of adjusting the focuser and then the primary, switching between the fine beam adapter and the holographic ring projector, and making sure that we can get unbroken rings with the holographic ring projector and a beam that bounces back to the emitter with the focuser. So it's just tiny adjustments to the primary mirror, tiny adjustments to the focuser, which we just made, and then tiny adjustments back on the primary mirror. And we keep cycling back and forth between these until the collimation is as good as we can get it. We've got a broken ring right over here, but it's fully illuminated down here. So we need to adjust the primary mirror to make this center ring uniformly illuminated. And now I'm going to adjust the top right screw for the primary mirror, because that's where the ring is broken. We're going to go loosen. And that almost gets uniform. It's still slightly broken in the top left, so we're going to adjust that now. It's the wrong direction. That was tight. We're going to go loose. change the focuser position to see if we can get that ring to thicken up a little bit so we can see what we're doing. That looks fairly close. So we'll lock it back in place and double check the focuser. So it looks like the primary mirror has a slight miscollimation. It's just ever so slightly broken here. But if you've noticed, we're getting closer to collimation every single time we do it. This ring is less and less broken each time we refine it. And that's the whole repeat the last two parts of the collimation over and over and over again until you get it right. So we know we're getting close. We'll probably only have one or two more refinements to make. Okay, so I've just made the adjustments to the primary mirror in the back and got the ring to be almost perfectly uniformly illuminated when we roll the focuser in or out. And when I look down the OTA with the fine focus laser, it appears that that laser is almost exactly center in the donut. So our primary mirror adjustments did not throw the focuser collimation off very much. So we're going to make just a minor change. And you can see that it's still fairly well centered. And if I do that blink test, it's still bouncing right back onto the emitter. So the secondary is holding its collimation, which is exactly what we want. So I think all we need to do is drop that laser down into that donut just a hair. Okay, I've switched out the fine focus for the holographic ring projector, and I've tightened down all of the bolts for the focuser collimation. The primary mirror bolts are still tight. We're just gonna check the collimation and see how it looks. And that's damn near perfect. With the light off, you can see the rings a lot better. I've got the focuser racked all the way out. And I'm just going to slowly run it in. And it looks like the beam breaks in the upper left ever so slightly. So what I'm going to do is just make a very tiny adjustment. See if I can't loosen that one up a little bit. And that looks perfect. Run it out, in, all the way in. That ring disappears almost uniformly. Might need to make an adjustment here because the bottom left now is there. That looks pretty uniform. I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snug the primary bolts in just a little bit while I keep this on, and what I'm looking for is for that to shift a little as I put some tension now on here to help it hold. And you do not want to over tighten these at all. What you want to do is just get firm or snug tension on these locking screws. Now once you've got some tension put on those primary screws, run the focus in And we can see that we upset the balance a little bit. That top right breaks. So what we want to do then is, with those primary locking screws secure, we're going to loosen the bolts only. We're not tightening them because it's already locked in place tight, but we can back that mirror out a little, just a little. Put it in. It seems balanced. Tighten up that slack on the grub screw. And what we're doing is that tension is upsetting the primary mirror a little bit. See, now we've maybe upset it a little too much. And so we're basically just fine-tuning the tension on these screws by backing out the grub that locks it in place and then adjusting the primary mirror tilt opposite of where the ring breaks. Now this is a balancing act you probably won't get right the first time, but just be careful with it. Don't force anything. If something feels a little tight, stop. And that is a collimated Ritchey Chretien telescope. Everything appears to be pretty evenly illuminated. This might be about as good as we can get it. So, as you've just seen, collimating a Ritchey Chretien telescope is not very difficult when you understand the right process to do it. The very first surface that you want to get true collimation on is your secondary mirror. And you do that by first roughing the alignment of the primary mirror and the focuser so that you can bounce a beam into the middle of that secondary mirror and then adjust the secondary mirror to bounce that beam directly back onto the emitter. From that reference point, you just refine the alignment of both the primary mirror and the focuser. Remember, adjusting the primary mirror will impact the focuser's collimation. So any changes you make to the primary mirror have to be followed up by a refinement of the focuser's collimation. The focuser should always be the last thing you collimate after you have both the secondary and primary mirror aligned. Ritchey Chretien telescopes will hold their collimation for a while. Unlike a Newtonian telescope that needs to be collimated nightly, a Ritchey Chretien or other Cassegrain style telescope can hold their collimation for several weeks or even several months at a time. Meaning, this collimation that we just went through will not need to be done very frequently, 2, maybe 3 times a year. Additionally, once you've got it collimated this well, every subsequent collimation that you do is just going to be a slight refinement for any shifting that could happen due to thermal expansion and contraction of those screws and the adjustment plates over basically seasonal temperature variations. So don't let a Ritchey Chrétien's intimidating collimation process put you off from purchasing one of these telescopes. They're actually pretty easy to collimate. It's just a bunch of little steps and repetition. Once you've collimated one of these telescopes 2 or 3 times, it becomes second nature. They're really not that hard. If you found this video helpful, please share it to anybody else who has questions about collimating a Ritchey Chretien telescope. And if I've earned your subscription, by all means, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and click the notification button so you can have access to these videos when they're published. I really hope that you found this video educational and that you've learned the easy process for collimating a Ritchey Chretien telescope. Until next time, clear skies, and I'll see you in the next one.